What's up, guys? Today we're gonna talk about one of my favorite systems of playing against the queen's pawn move pawn to d4. And that system that you can use as black is very simple, it's just one setup, and it's also very aggressive with lots of tricks inside. Now, it starts with the move pawn to f5, the Dutch defense. And why am I talking about it? Well, not too long ago I recorded a video showing you how you can get to the same system from the Nimzo Indian defense starting from knight of 6. But as some of you guys correctly said in comments, when people go for the London system, then that system doesn't work quite well. So I wanted to share with you how you can get to this system for sure, regardless of what your opponent hoped to play today, right? You're bringing him right into that system with the Dutch defense, so you go right with the move f5. Another beauty of this move is that you can play it against virtually any other move of white. So I can play almost anything else, knight f3, d4, c4, almost whatever they want, you can still play f5 and get to the system that you want. That obviously will not work only if they start with e4. Now, but against d4 or other moves, you can go for the Dutch defense. Now, after that, another beauty of this is that your opponents usually know absolutely nothing about this system, because it's just uncommon. Now, they'll usually play their standard moves as if it was the queen's gambit, but it's not. Now, after that, they go c4, you continue with e6, and here they play knight c3, which is already kinda wrong, because it allows you to bring this bishop over here, and that is what you want. In this system, you want the bishop to be here, and you don't mind actually to trade on c3. You can do it right away, or you can do it later, it doesn't matter too much, but basically, this knight controls this important square e4, and in the long run, you want to put your own knight there. That's the reason why you're not against the idea of trading off this knight on c3. Now, here after white goes knight f3, you can actually go ahead and take it straight away. Here, if you do this right now, another advantage is that you also double his pawns, right? So after this exchange, he's got double pawns, which is also nice. But again, the primary reason is not about these pawns even, but rather about the fact that now this e4 square is no longer controlled by white, and you can land your knight there, and it's going to be a really juicy square for the knight. Now, let me also answer another common objection against the Dutch defense, because sometimes people say, oh, like Stockfish doesn't like it, or like somebody, says it's a bad opening. Like, I agree. Generally, like a lot of GMs are skeptical about the Dutch defense. And, if you asked Ben Feingold about this, he'd cringe if you told him that you're playing the Dutch. If you also told him that you're playing the Russo Gambit against e4, he'd have a heart attack. I mean, I have nothing against Ben, right? He's a great guy, and I have a crazy theory that he'd be very suitable at being Nakamura's father. I mean, somehow these two have something in common. Or I don't know, or maybe I'm crazy. Anyway, the point is, like, GMs are skeptical because this system weakens some squares in your position. And if you're playing this against a Grandmaster, that can backfire. They can really play positional really well, take advantage of these weak squares and make you suffer. But that has nothing to do with your opponents, right? They have no idea about how to take advantage of any of these weaknesses, so you can play it safely. Now, after this, you want to play knight of 6, and in the long run, bring your knight right here. Also, you want to bring your bishop to this great long diagonal. And you can start with either move, either knight of 6 or b6. I prefer b6 slightly more, because after this move, they're less likely to play bishop g5 because you don't have your knight there, right? So there is no pin. And bishop g5 certainly doesn't change much. We'll talk about that in a second. But anyway, if they don't play it, it's even better. Now after that, let's say they develop, you bring your bishop right here. Really great diagonal. You once again reinforce your control over this square, but we also expect him to castle within a couple moves, and then your bishop will support your kingside attack. All right, after that, let's say they develop somehow. You do the same, they castle. And here, the most played move by white is Rook e1, which goes to show that your opponents indeed do not understand what is going on here. Because Rook e1 is useless and actually even harmful. Because the only reason to justify this move would be if white can play e4 at some point, but they really can't. You just control this square way too hard. And moreover, you're going to play knight e4 yourself and completely barricade this line, which goes to show that this rook is completely useless right here on this e-file. Also, it a little bit weakens the kingside, because this pawn on f2 is no longer guarded by the rook, and we'll see a little bit later that sometimes this weakness becomes vulnerable. Anyway, with your knight on e4, first of all, you really have this nice outpost that controls so many squares in the position. And besides that, it also creates a direct threat to this pawn on c3, which forces white to defend it and to waste some time. They'll usually play queen to c2. So that is the setup that you're aiming at while playing this system. And you're going to play this setup in most of the cases. No matter what they do, you're going to aim for this setup. What do you do next? Next, you typically want to attack his kingside. You have this monstrous bishop, Plus, thanks to this pawn on f5, it's easy to bring your heavy pieces into play. You can either use this rook lift and bring your rook over here, or you can similarly bring your queen into the same position. When it comes to your queenside knight, typically you do not want to develop it right here because that would obstruct your own bishop, and you want the bishop to take part into your attack, right? You don't want to blockade it. That's why instead of developing the knight right here, you usually play d6 first, and on the next move bring the knight right here on d7. Then your entire position is very harmonious, the pieces are supporting each other, they're not standing in the way of each other, and it's just a great setup to aim for. So you go d6. Now, very often white will find it annoying that there is this knight on e4 that attacks them and that blockades the position. They can't do much when this knight is standing there, so they'll often try to somehow trade it off, let's say by going knight d2 and offering the exchange. Now, there is no point for you to take there. Very rarely it's really necessary for you. And what can you do instead? Well, a whole lot of things. Now, another disadvantage of white moving the knight away is that you can just look at white moving away all the pieces from the king. The king is now lonely. There is nobody around, which makes it vulnerable. And you can even go for some really all-in attack with something like knight takes f2, which will get your opponent by surprise, but in fact, it's quite anticipated because that was your plan to attack on the king side anyway. And he abandoned the king side completely, right? All the pieces are clumsy and standing somewhere else. So king takes, now you throw the queen out here, attack the king, attack this pawn, indirectly the rook on e1, and it's already really difficult for white to defend this position. Like if they play the most natural move like g3 just to push your queen away, you just take over here, and that's end of story within a couple moves. Also, the king cannot go back to e1 because then it will drop the rook on e1. And if the king tries to defend it, then you can keep checking the king, and then after something like this, it is basically over once again. Now you already won 2 pawns, you keep attacking, and white is completely destroyed. One of the questions you may have is, what if your opponent does not develop the knight right here to c3, and let's say he develops the other knight instead? Well, you can wait a little bit. You have other useful moves to play. You can also play knight f6, waiting for him to bring the knight right here, so that as soon as he plays the knight, you can then play bishop b4 and pin the knight. If he doesn't play that, you can also play b6 and bishop b7, making those other useful moves, still waiting for him to develop his knight. And if he just never does it at all, you will just play bishop b4 check without his knight on c3, then you would still trade it off either against his knight or bishop, whatever he uses to cover the king, you'll be able to trade off your dark squared bishop. But in most cases they will play knight c3 because it's very natural, and then as soon as they do so, you play bishop to b4. Now, whether they play bishop d2 or don't, it doesn't matter really. Again, your plan remains to be the same. So let's say they don't, they just try to develop, and then you can trade. Now they also have these double pawns, that's nice, you develop your bishop as usual, they castle. In this game, black played knight e4 straight away, attacking this pawn, white defending, black castled. Now, also in this game, white played one of the moves that you will probably encounter frequently, it's the move pawn a4. They often wish to push this pawn forward, just to trade off this weak pawn, or maybe to somehow a little bit harass you on the queen side. It's not dangerous, it doesn't really do all that much, so you can pretty much ignore it. But in this particular case, there is also a tricky idea. You can actually go knight to c6. And normally, I said earlier that you do not want to have your knight right here because it blocks your bishop, and that is true. However, if he wants to play a4, a5, then having your knight right here actually blocks this move. He can't do that, that will just lose the pawn for nothing. Moreover, if he does not play a5, you can land your own knight on a5 sometimes and put pressure against this weak pawn. And that is also alright. Now you will mix 2 plans. Fundamentally, you still want to attack his king on the king side, but you can put some pressure to his doubled weak pawns on the queen side as well. Moreover, it also sets a nice trick along the way, because your opponent thinks, hey, wait a second, this knight that used to be so annoying is now hanging. I can just take it, and after the exchange, I win a pawn, I'm good. But in fact, that's a trap, because after that you play knight a5, and you just create way too many threats, because think about this, your bishop is now active and it attacks the queen and indirectly the knight. Also, after this trade, your rook has this semi-open file. Plus, your knight attacks this weak pawn on c4 and maybe even want to jump to b3 in some variations and attack the rook or something else there, right? So you have a lot of threats, and now even with the best defense, white is already at a disadvantage, but very often they'll just play a wrong move and will go down quickly. Because for instance, if he wants to defend the queen as well as this pawn, like the most natural thing to do is to play queen to d3, but after that we make use of our powerful bishop and you sack the rook right here on f3. It's not even really a sacrifice because it's a forced winning for black. Queen g5 check, king h1 is forced, now bishop takes f3 is mate. Some of your opponents will choose to counter this pin by going bishop to d2. What are you going to do after that? Well, all the same stuff. It's just that you don't have to hurry with the move bishop takes c3 because it no longer forces him to ruin his pawn structure. Therefore, you can wait for your opponent to play a3, they usually will, which will just waste some time for white, and only then you'll trade. Therefore, after this, you just continue with your usual moves. As soon as they play a3, then you trade on c3. After this, you still go b6, trying to flank out of your bishop, and you do that. Bishop b7, they develop their bishop, you land your knight to e4 as always. In some variations, maybe potentially you may consider taking there and doubling his pawns, but for the most part you do not want this, because your knight is very strong and you want to keep it for your attack. Anyway, they will be a little bit annoyed by the threat, and they'll usually play something like queen c2 just to make sure that if you take, they can recapture with the queen and not weaken their pawn structure. Now, after this, you play your standard moves, you go for d6, they castle, you go knight d7, and you got the setup that you want. Now everything's cool. After that, we aim to continue our attack on the kingside somehow. Now, the nice thing is that they often help you. They help you by the fact that they see that this knight on e4 is annoying, they want to trade it off, and they often play knight d2 trying to trade off this knight on e4. Now, as I said earlier, there is no need for you to take anything. The knight is already guarded very well. Therefore, you don't have to react at all and waste time. Now, the nice thing about him trying to move the knight away is that after knight to d2, this knight moves away from the kingside. And you're wanting to attack him there, right? Therefore, him removing one of the defenders, one of the key defenders, is a great thing for you. Moreover, when the knight is not on f3 anymore, it no longer covers these two squares g5 and h4, which is cool, because it means that you can throw your queen out into the attack straight away to one of these squares, either here or here. And both ways are good, because it allows you to include your strongest piece into the attack. For example, queen g5. And now they already have to be really careful, because if they don't pay attention and they play whatever, then this queen and this bishop can work together and you just win. So trade right there, and on the next move is queen takes g2 mate. Therefore, they gotta be careful. They cannot allow this to happen. But even if they notice the threat, it's not very easy to stop it actually, because what can they do? Some of their opponents will play lightheartedly f3, thinking that you're gonna take. But f3 is actually a blunder, because that weakens this pawn on a3 and you can just take it and check his king and attack the bishop. So that's just a straightforward blunder and you win. After king h1, I mean, you can win with virtually any decent move, even if you just trade off the knight. But actually there is a winning idea here, and let this be our puzzle of the day. So it is your task to find the best move for black. Please think about this, and if you can't find it, write it down in comments below. Another common mistake of white would be playing bishop to f3, which looks perfectly logical. It strengthens the g2 square, it hits your knight on e4, but it's a miscalculation. Now, you just take here on d2, and you attack here, here, as well as your bishop attacks this one. Therefore, like, they have only one move to play, it's bishop takes b7. They gotta take. If they don't, you'll take yourself, and you'll checkmate them soon. So they have to take. Now you take the rook. Now they have to recapture your rook. If they take the knight, then you'll just move the rook away, and you'll have a rook against the bishop. You want the exchange. They do not want this. So if they don't want to be down in material, they have to grab the rook. But now, they expect you to take here, and they to take here, and that would be just a massive trade-off. But since your knight is going to be lost anyway, you want to get the best price for it. And so you first play this in-between move, knight takes c3, hitting the queen along the way. And after they take and queen takes c3, that's check, another in-between move, and only then you actually finally, generously enough, get back the bishop, and then you end up with two extra pawns. He has a vulnerable king, and it's waiting for you once again. Here's another little problem that you may encounter, but we'll see that it's not a problem at all. Sometimes instead of just playing e3, they can play a bishop g5 and pin your knight here on f6. What are you going to do then? Well, all the same stuff. This pin, in fact, is completely harmless, it doesn't do anything, and you can continue your plan. You still go b6, you play your bishop to this active position, after this you castle, and you can notice that, unlike the classical Queen's Gambit or other variations where this knight could have been unpleasant, with the pawn on f5 it's totally harmless, because your knight is defended really well. Moreover, in this system, usually we're gonna play d6, followed by knight d7, and providing one more support to this knight. Therefore, this pawn is like completely harmless for you. But there's also one special thing that you may remember here. If they've got their bishop on g5, the useful thing that you can do is to play your queen to e8, and that pursues a couple goals. First, you want to transfer the queen to the kingside, where it will support your attack. From there, it will also hit the bishop, making it actually unpleasant for white. And secondly, you also get out of the pin. meaning there is no pin anymore, and you can play knight e4 on the next move. If you go there, you'll hit this pawn, you'll also hit the bishop on g5. That's why I said that bishop g5 is not dangerous at all. Anyway, let's see what may happen after that. In most cases, white played knight e5, and I've told you, white clearly has no clue of what to do here. Knight e5, they're kind of playing standard moves of the queen's gambit, but it's not queen's gambit, right? So knight e5 makes no sense at all because you're going to play d6, and that was part of your plan, just pushing the knight back. After this, you can play knight d7, completing your setup. Here, the most played move, I believe, is rook e1, and we talked about this. It's another common error, completely useless, and a little bit harmful because it weakens the kingside. Now you can go knight e4 or queen g6. In both cases, this bishop feels unpleasant. Now there is already a straightforward threat. You want to take the knight, attacking the queen. This will also eliminate the defender of the bishop, so that on the next move you can grab the bishop. So they gotta do something to counter this threat. In most cases, they'll take, you recapture, which again goes to show that this whole bishop g5 pin didn't result in anything. And now they also feel unpleasant. Again, you've got your queen right here, you've got your bishop right here, putting pressure. That feels unpleasant, because if they ever move their queen away, that'll be a blunder, you'll take, and because of the pin, they can't recapture and they lose the game. Let's take it back. So what can they do? I mean, of course, you don't have like winning threats right away, but for white, it's still pretty annoying because it's hard to come up with any meaningful move actually here. Now, in this game, they played knight h4, trying to kick away this queen, but of course, we don't want to go back. We want to keep it on the queen side. Black played queen h6, attacking the knight. I tried g3, but now this weakens this whole diagonal. Of course, that's great for you. Like when g5 to kick off the knight, it went back to g2. I was just trying to, feel the holes here, but it doesn't work. Queen h3. Now queen takes g2 threat is real. They got to cover somehow. They played f3, trying to block the diagonal, but again, black ignored it and played knight g4. And now white is completely lost. So black is threatening queen takes h2, and white cannot take the knight because of this mate. There is one variation here which is very useful and funny, and it confuses your opponents a lot. Now, after you've just played bishop b4, some of your opponents will play queen to b3. They want to guard their knight and attack your bishop. Now, we know that generally speaking, you don't mind trading off your bishop, and that would be fine to play this move, but it's even stronger to just play a5 and say, hey, I'm going to keep my bishop right there. Now, your opponent wants to reinforce his idea. He wants to play a3, forcing the trade, but you still don't take. You instead play a very paradoxical move, pawn a4. All of a sudden, you drop the bishop and you counterattack their queen. Now, what the heck is going on here? Well, first off, they cannot take this pawn because of your rook. They also cannot take it with the knight because the knight is still pinned. But of course, the main question is, hey, how about just grabbing a bishop? Was that a blunder? That's what your opponent thinks. But it's not, because you go knight c6, and it turns out that he is trapped. The queen has nowhere to go. Your pawn from a4 is doing a good job controlling this square, and therefore the queen can't go back. And if it tries to go forward, you just keep attacking it. Only one square is available. Now rook a5, and the queen has nowhere to go. After they, let's say, decide to get a rook for the queen. Now, theoretically, they have a rook and a minor piece for the queen, which gives you material advantage. That's already nice. But secondly, you also attack this pawn and you threaten knight b3, forking right here, which gives you a totally winning position. For example, if they want to guard this pawn and play e3, you can play bishop b7. This can also tricky. That puts the bishop to an active diagonal, and your opponent may think, oh, let me also grab this pawn so that I get some material. But that loses nicely. You play knight b3, attacking the rook and the bishop. They gotta move it, and now you have two ways to win the game, and both of them are pretty amusing. One is bishop e4, and all of a sudden now the rook is trapped. So previously, just a couple moves ago, you trapped their queen, now you trapped their rook. What the heck is going on here? That's one way. The other way is also funny, is the move queen a8, and you're creating this very unusual battery. Like, first of all, you're attacking this knight, but if the knight moves, then along this battery you can grab the pawn on g2. So for instance, the knight moves, you grab the pawn on g2, and you have this very crazy harmony of your pieces where, after all is said and done, you also grab the other rook in the corner. Like, you can either trap this rook or that one. Either way, you win. Some days ago, I published a video about the Nimzo Indian and how you can get to the same system coming from the Nimzo Indian defense. So these two ways are actually complement each other pretty well. You can use them together. If you're curious how you can do this, check out this video right here. Also, if you want to learn how to find attacking moves on your own so that you become a strong attacking player, check out the free masterclass right there at the top. I got messages from people every day literally saying that it was eye-opening and very helpful, so check it out.